Hi students, welcome to the massive open online course on international economics. Today we are going to talk about basis of international trade. This is module number 5. Students, you remember that we have already gone through 4 modules. So apart from the first one, the module 1, in other modules, in 3 modules, we have already talked about a few things without knowing much details about the reasons behind trade. So in those modules, we talked about trade and gains from trade a little bit. And then we also discussed offer curve. Offer curve is entirely based on trade. But very surprisingly, we have discussed the issues of a little bit of gains from trade, a little bit of offer exchange between two countries, traded countries, and traded goods or services without knowing precisely the reason behind such trade. So in this module today, we will decipher what is the reason behind trade. So what is the reason for which the countries are engaged in trade, or to be more precise, what is the reason behind gain or benefit that is channelized through trade. Now students, if you look at the slide, the first one, it is written that it is basis of international trade. Mind it is not basis of international trade. So when I say it is basis of international trade, it's a plural thing, right? So more than one reasons are there. So we need to explain all those reasons one by one. So before I go into detailing those reasons, let me just give you a brief outline of this talk. So first I will explain the absolute cost advantage theory of trade. What is that? That I will explain a little bit today, and then we will explain more on absolute cost advantage theory in a later module. And then in today's module, we will also discuss about the comparative cost advantage theory, also the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem. You can call it Heckscher-Ohlin theory. It is also called the endowment theory or the factor proportions theory. And then we move to new trade theory. New trade theory is based on increasing returns to scale. There is another argument that I have not mentioned here very intentionally. This is called time zone driven trade. So I will touch upon that issue a little bit. Why I have not used the word here or the term, because the latest books, textbooks on international economics are yet to incorporate this idea. This is a very new idea. In fact, I have been working on this area for the last 5 to 7 years. There are 2 books on this thing. I'll mention about those books at the fag end of my talk. Now, let me move to detailed part of today's various theories on today's discussion. Now, if you look at the slide, you can find a little bit of interesting thing that the difference in price is essentially the basic reason behind trade. So what do we mean by the difference in price? So think of an example that I am producing mango and you are producing, say, shard. So the point is that the price of mango should be different in these 2 countries. 2 countries, what are the 2 countries? The 2 trading countries. So if the mango prices are same in 2 trading countries, and if the countries are India and America, then there is no point of trading mango between America and India, because the prices are same. So if prices are different, then there might be some reason behind understanding the fact that India or USA may feel interested in buying this good from another country or selling this good to another country. So now, let us take an example here. Say country A is producing 1 meter of cloth at rupees 100 and country B is producing the same amount of cloth at rupees 75. Mind it, one thing I want to make very clear at the outset is that, here quality are not different. Quality are not different means, we are talking about homogeneous good. So goods are perfect substitutes. So it does not matter whether I buy this commodity from country A or from country B. Essentially, I'm getting the same product. So essentially, if you look at, if I put an example here, so I'm not talking about a car, Maruti Suzuki car or say Maruti 800 with BMW. So there is a quality difference. So if I compare these 2 goods, Maruti Suzuki car produced in America and Maruti Suzuki car produced in India, and then we compare what are the prices of these goods. And then we find that the people of country A will essentially import country B's cloth. Why? Country B is producing the same cloth at a price rupees 75. So I should not, if I am a resident of country A, I should not produce this good. Rather, I should buy this good from country B because it is cheaper there. And in the same way, we can introduce another commodity, say wheat, and then can find that in one country it is cheaper and in another country it is relatively costly. So we will buy the commodity from the cheaper source. Now the point is that if the prices are same, this is what I mentioned, is that there should not be any trade. And one more thing that let's be add here, if there is only one factor of production, so labor. So this is labor theory of value. So the requirement of labor to produce the one commodity is essentially reflecting what? Reflecting the efficiency of labor. Let me give you an example. If the labor can produce the good both in country A and country B, but the point of difference is that the amount of labor required to produce the same good by the same amount in country A is 10, and the labor requirement to produce the same good in another country is 20, then it is quite apparent that the country producing the good using 10 labors, the labors are more efficient in that country compared to the other country where 20 units of labor are required. So, essentially, the output or the price or the labor requirement is a reflection of efficiency. We will emphasize more on this thing later. Now, let us use this diagram to explain the phenomenon a little bit. So let us assume that there are two countries. One country is country A, the other country is country B. So country A, I call it home, and country B, I call it foreign. Right? Look at the diagram. These two diagrams are similar but not identical. Why not identical? I'll explain. If you look at the left panel of the diagram, there is a demand curve and there is a supply curve. And as you know, students, the equilibrium takes place at a point where demand is equal to supply. And here the price, according to the equilibrium condition at home, is equilibrium price is P. So it is the price and the quantity sold in the domestic market is Q1. And now jump cut to the right panel. In the right panel, the demand supply is equated at a point which is slightly higher compared to this point. So this gives what? This gives a situation that the price in foreign country should ideally be higher than the price that is in home country. The price is here, which is higher than this OP price in the home country. So now this is what I said, is that if there is a difference in price, then there might be a situation of trade. Now think of a price which is higher than P. Now this is the dotted line. If you look at the dotted line, you see, students, here at price P1, the domestic demand means the demand in foreign is this much, because this is the point that is on the demand curve. And look, at the same time, the supply for a price Pi is equal to this much. So this is the amount of excess supply at home if the price is P1 or say Pi. And now you extend this price line to check what is happening to the foreign country. So the foreign country is having excess demand of this amount. So the bottom line is that when the price goes up a little bit, domestic country or the foreign economy is having excess supply and the foreign economy is having excess demand. So this excess supply is going to be matched by the excess demand of the foreign country. So this is a possibility of trade now when the price is P1 or Pi. But now look at the another phenomenon of this kind of situation. Home economy was at equilibrium when the price was P. But now the price is P1 and P1 is higher. So the home producers are happy. Home producers are happy because they are getting more price. And compared to the foreign price, which is this line, the home consumers are also not forced to buy from the foreign country. Now look at what is happening to the foreign consumer. The foreign consumers are getting the commodity supplied by the home or country A at a relatively low price. the price is here. So foreign consumers are also happy that they are getting the commodity at a lower price, and the domestic producers are happy because they can sell the commodity at a higher price. So the internationally traded equilibrium will be attained at a point which is slightly higher than the domestic price, means the price of country A, and lower than the price of equilibrium price of country B. Students, one thing I request you to remember throughout the entire course, that the equilibrium in trade scenario or in international trade analysis means at a price, the equilibrium means the whole world is an equilibrium. So one excess demand must be matched by the excess supply in another country, or total production of a good must be equal to the consumption of the good in various countries. So whenever I talk about home and foreign, the total consumption and total production must be equal. So when the price goes up because of trade, if you look at the total supply in home and foreign, and you consider total demand in home and foreign, that must be equal. Basis of these assumptions that I mentioned before, that the labor is the only factor of production, and on the backdrop, depending on the backdrop that I just explained, now let me just very quickly go to the absolute cost advantage theory that I promised to explain. Let us assume that there are two countries, the US and India. The example that I am giving you is that, so how much labor is required to produce 1 unit of wheat, and how much labor is required to produce 1 unit of cloth. And the two trading countries, the possible trading countries, are United States of America and India. Now look at this table. 4 units of labor is used to produce 1 unit of wheat, and 6 units of labor is used to produce 1 unit of wheat in India. So a comparison is done between 4 and 6, and 4 and 6 are the labor requirement to produce the same good. And in case of cloth, the arguments are similar. So USA requires 8 units of labor, and India requires 3 units of labor. Now students, if you just use your brain, you need not to work hard, you need not to push yourself much to understand that. USA labor requirement is less compared to India in producing wheat, and India's labor requirement is less compared to America in respect of cloth. So it is evident that USA has advantage in producing wheat, and India has advantage in producing cloth. So if this is the situation, then what we say is that USA has absolute advantage over India in wheat production, and India has absolute advantage over USA in cloth production. We will explain more on this issue in one of the coming modules. And this is the thing that I explained. Now, for a simplicity, let us assume that the total amount of labor hours is given at 40. Now, what is going to happen here if we allocate 40 units of labor to producing wheat and cloth in both the countries? Then you can see, students, from the diagram, say in our previous table I used it is unit of labor. Now what I am saying is that it is not the unit of labor, rather it is the labor hours. So if 40 labor hours is used in India to produce cloth, 10 cloths are produced. And for wheat, 5 units of wheat are produced, because 8 labor hours are required in India to produce wheat. Similarly, for USA, the cloth production should be 6.6 and the 13.3. Now, if you use your knowledge of drawing budget line from microeconomics and use the principle here, and you draw the budget line kind of thing, but if you draw it, then what you are going to get is the price line. Is the price line for the two countries, and the price line is nothing but the production possibility frontier. We will explain more on this issue later. Just hang on, don't worry, because this is the preliminary idea to drive home the basic argument of absolute cost advantage theory. Now the point that the students you may ask, you are saying the labor requirement, you are saying the labor hours, and at the same time you mentioned about it is the price difference. How can you do this kind of thing? You are confusing us. Students, don't worry. It is not the thing that I am confusing you, but the thing is that if the wage rate is normalized to 1, then the labor hours required to produce a commodity is the cost of production. So labor hours multiplied by the wage rate, which is normalized to 1, means if 4 labor hours is required, multiplied by 1 means 4 is the cost of production. And in case of perfectly competitive market, the cost of production should be equal to the price. So students, don't worry. Essentially, labor hours is the reflection of the cost of production, and in competitive market, this cost of production should be equal to the price. And here you can see the price ratios are different. So if the price ratios are different, what I said is that there is a possibility of trade. So that's the idea of absolute cost advantage theory. But the point is that this absolute cost advantage theory may break down in case of situation. Look at this table. The table is that you consider England and India instead of US and India. The example says what? Cloth production, England requires 90 labors and India requires 110 labors. In wheat production, England requires 80 labors, India requires 120 labors. So England has all over absolute advantage for both the goods. So if that is the case, absolute cost advantage theory says that England should produce both the goods, cloth and wheat, and India should produce nothing. That is not the case, because all the countries are producing, all the countries are consuming, and they are surviving and taking. So if that is the situation, then what is the reason behind trade? It is definitely not the absolute cost advantage theory. Then what? Then this is called the comparative cost advantage theory. So now it is the channel through which you can trade. So essentially it's a comparison between, you may do comparison from two different angles. One is compare between two countries for a particular commodity, or compare between two goods that one country is producing and then compare among two countries. So this means you are applying the principle of opportunity cost. How much of one good has to be sacrificed if you want to produce one more unit of another good? And then you compare where it is more cheap. I'm not saying it is cheaper only. It is more cheaper. More cheaper means more efficient or less inefficient. So I will explain more on this issue in another module that deals with the comparative cost advantage theory. So when absolute cost advantage theory fails, comparative cost advantage theory comes in and comes with full flow to explain this phenomenon of international trade. Now, one more thing I want to mention at this point of lecture, students, that comparative cost advantage theory still is the most important international trade theory. This is the most important reason behind international trade. One very important and very significant famous economist, trade theorist, who has been asked that, can you tell me anything which is not trivial and very significant and relevant in international economics? The name of the person on the economist was Paul Samuelson. And Paul Samuelson took some time. He gave the answer that there is only one thing that is important and which is non-trivial and true. That is comparative cost advantage theory. Now, students, you can understand the relevance and significance of comparative cost advantage theory. Now, comparative cost advantage theory, as I said, students, it is based on the opportunity cost. Now, you have to calculate a little bit of, but don't worry, this calculation part will be done in another module. But apart from that, you can check any textbook, because comparative cost advantage theory is the building block of Ricardian theory of trade. So it is very clearly written in any standard textbook. So you just follow textbook. I'm pretty sure that you'd be able to understand the reason behind comparative cost advantage principle. Absolute cost advantage theory and comparative cost advantage theory, we assume that there is only one factor of production, that is labor. But students, this is not the reality, that we use only labor to produce the commodity. So what if we have more than one factor of production? So labor and capital, labor and land, labor could be used with machine. More than 2, 3, 5, 10 factors. Then what? So then there is another theorem that can explain the reason behind trade. This is called Heckscher-Ohlin theorem or Heckscher-Ohlin theory of trade. This Heckscher-Ohlin theory tells us that one country should produce that commodity which is produced more intensively by a factor which is abundant in a country. This sounds a little difficult or a little complicated, so let me explain a little bit more on this issue. Say there are two countries. These two countries have some factors. The factors are labor and capital. So the point is that one country should produce that commodity if, say the commodity is X. So if X uses labor more intensively means labor by capital ratio for X production is more compared to another commodity, if there is any, say it is Y. So labor by capital used in producing 1 unit of X is more compared to labor by capital used to produce 1 unit of Y. Then I can say X is labor intensive. So one country should produce X which is labor intensive if the country is labor abundant. So what is that? Again, you are bringing in another concept like abundance, labor abundance. Labor abundance means L by K ratio endowment of a country is more compared to L by K ratio in another country. Let me go more deeper into this analysis. India is a labor abundant country because in India we have more labor compared to capital. Compared to America, America is capital abundant country. So labor by capital in America is less. Total labor supply and capital supply compared to India. So one comparison is between two countries, total endowment of factor. The another comparison is between two goods. So X requires L by K, Y also requires L by K. If X requires more L by K compared to Y, then X is labor intensive. And since India is labor abundant, India should produce X and export X. And since America is capital abundant, America should produce Y, which is capital intensive. So this is the idea of Heckscher-Ohlin theory of trade. Essentially, this is called Heckscher-Ohlin-Samuelson-Vanek theory of trade. So that can be explained by using this example, but I am not go into the details of this example because, we have to explain this Heckscher-Ohlin theorem again in much more detail in one of the coming modules. But one thing I want to mention here is that it is not necessarily always true that if one country has more labor, that may be labor abundant. So it is not the absolute amount of labor. It is essentially the ratio of labor by capital. So you look at this table, country A and country B. So country A has 25 units of labor and 20 units of capital. And country B has 12 units of labor and 15 units of capital. So capital by labor ratio. So capital is more in country A, 20 units compared to 15 in country B. So you may think that country A is capital rich or capital abundant. It is not. You look at the ratio. The capital labor ratio in country A is 0.8. And the capital labor ratio in country B is 1.25. So essentially, it is not the absolute number of capital in country A or country B. It is labor by capital or capital by labor in country A and country B. Students, you have to be a little careful about it. Now, that was the labor capital or factor endowment theory of trade. Now, what after that? Now, there is another phenomenon, the diagram that I am not going to explain here. So there is another concept that is very new, I must say. This is called increasing returns to scale explanation of trade. Let me tell you the background story of this thing a little bit. Because, the basic idea behind trade is that if I produce car, I should export car. This means that I am not going to produce agricultural food. I am not going to export agricultural food. But in reality, in abstract terms, if one country produces X, this country should not produce Y. This country should specialize in the production of X. But the reality is a bit different. What is the reality? In reality, we observed that one country is producing X, exporting X, and the same country is also importing X. The example was between America and Germany. America was producing and exporting car to Germany, and America was also importing car from Germany. So the standard trade theories are not capable of explaining this kind of trade. This is called intra-industry trade. The previously what we had, that was inter-industry trade. X is being traded with Y. Now X is being traded with X. Why? The main reason is that I may now use Maruti Suzuki car, but I may be interested in buying Volkswagen Polo. So India may export Maruti Suzuki car, but India may import Volkswagen Polo. So the point is that we want to have more variety in consumption. So because students, you remember that you do not wear similarly colored shirts every day. White shirt, black shirt, blue shirt, every day you are changing. Why? Because you love variety. You love different colors in life, in consumption. So this is another argument. The issue was taken into account by very important and significant trade theorist Paul Krugman, and he introduced this idea of intra-industry trade using the idea of increasing returns to scale. Now, students, I want to tell you one thing that I promised at the very beginning, because I have not mentioned here in the slide, but I want to say this thing. There is another phenomenon which is coming up these days for the last couple of years, maybe one decade. This is called time zone induced trade. And I am saying you this because there are not much books in the literature. There are only two textbooks in this line. One I have mentioned here in this slide. One is by Toru Kikuchi, that was published in 2013. That was published by Routledge Publishing House. And the another book that was published in 2021. So this is published by Marjit Mandal and Nakanishi. So I am one of the author of that book. So the main idea behind this kind of explanation is that, so when India sleeps, America works. So you or I cannot work for 24 hours, but the whole world together can work for 24 hours. And you know that time is the most precious thing and time is money. So is it possible that we can use the difference in time between America and India and can go for working for 24 hours? Yes, we can. Because look, in the era of digitalization, now sitting behind at home, in the comfort of home, you are ordering for the apparels or the shirt that you use. And when you are placing the order, that is 12 in the midnight. So now in case of the situation where there was no digitalization, you couldn't use that. But now the point is that when America finishes half part of a work, America can send the half part work or service to India through internet. And India starts working on that thing because India just wakes up early in the morning, and then 12 hours work is essentially complemented by India's 12 hours. So if the work is requiring 24 hours, if it is done in America, it requires 2 consecutive days, calendar days. But if 12 hours is done in America and the next 12 hours is done in India, then what is happening? We are essentially getting the product in one calendar date. So as a whole, the whole world is saving one complete day, and that is very important, and that may lead to a substantial increase in welfare. And you know that the increase in welfare is the primary motive of all the governments or the trading nations. So this is called time zone induced trade in international literature. That is mainly service trade, and as you all know, the main driving force for the development of the entire world these days is driven by service. So that's all for the time being, because these are the, I should say, absolute cost advantage, comparative cost advantage, Heck-Schörling theorem, increasing returns to scale and trade, and to add one more thing is the time zone induced trade. These are essentially different bases of international trade. So thank you very much, students.